Now, the next half of this assignment deals with Module 4 in the Public Health Finance. And that one carries the fancy title of Financial Evaluation of New Program Initiatives, which is a fancy way of saying business plans. Now, again, using these small call-outs right here to tell you where to find the answers to certain questions in the assignment. You can see the reason that we do business plans. Now, a lot of people think of a business plan as something you take to the bank when you want money, and that's not a bad analogy even in a public health setting. In regular business, if you were thinking about starting a new company or a new shop, then you would go to the bank and they would want to know, well, what would they want to know? They would want to know kind of what is it? What are you going to be selling right there? What kind of company are you joining? Is it a franchise or is this a solo thing? Have you looked at your market right here? Are there enough people to buy your product in the area you're thinking of placing it? Or is there enough need if it's like a health thing, a health service? Is there enough need for that? The operating details. How many staff are you going to need? How much space are you going to need? Are you going to need cars? How much is all this going to cost? And then the financial analysis, given that you've kind of figured out how many people or how many clients you're going to have, and operationally, how much is it going to cost to give them services, let's pull it all together and figure out how much you're going to need for this startup. And this is all the stuff that you would put in a normal business plan if you were going to a bank and asking for a loan. By the same token, even if you're a not-for-profit land, you should be thinking of your programs the same way. For example, in terms of program description, is this something that takes care of patients directly? Let's say you're screening mothers for maternal health issues. Is this something where you're doing the screening yourselves? Or where you're just educating doctors and hospitals on how to do it from their perspective? Or is it a simple public awareness campaign to reduce the stigma, which is no small task in and of itself? So let's say it's an education program that's aimed at reducing the stigma of maternal mental health. So then your market analysis would look at, well, if you're looking at pregnant mothers, then you would look at how many pregnant mothers you've had in the last however many years. And then you'd also be more specific. In different communities, the levels of stigma associated with mental health care vary by community. So in that market analysis, you're going to have to start breaking it down by community and assessing the level of stigma that's keeping women from using mental health services, whether that level of stigma varies in different communities and by how much. And then in terms of operational details, we've kind of decided it's a public awareness thing, but just how much of that is it going to be social media based? Is it going to be in the news? Are you going to try and place news stories? How are you going to do that? These are all operating details. Are you going to have people whose focused job is it to go out there and get the word out? Are they going to need a budget to buy time on TV ads or billboards? And then once you've figured all of that out, you can start to do the financial analysis. Now, remember, in public health, the final measure might not be profit, but it might be, in the example I'm using, did we see an uptick in the use of maternal mental health services? And if so, how much? And that's where, if there are other programs, you could go out and compare your own spending and staffing and what you were doing. You could compare your results to peers to see if maybe are you doing it more or less efficiently than others. Is there something else you could try to get the word out better? But again, if all that sounds like you've taken something that's just trying to do a good public health thing and you've made it boring by making it sound like business, you have. But if you weren't taking it seriously, then you wouldn't have that perspective of, oh wait, are we following a best practice? Or is there ways that we can take our limited resources, because funding in public health is always limited, are there ways that we can use what we're spending to get more done? Now, as a side note, business plans aren't just for new programs. Business plans are also for existing programs, because once you've got a program up and running, you should reassess it over time to make sure it's still filling its goals, still operating efficiently, still achieving those outcomes that we talked about earlier that it's trying to achieve. Now, I've already touched on this question here about what's that role of financial analysis in public health agencies. We already kind of talked about it. Basically, our financial resources right there are limited, and public health workers can't work for free no matter how much good they want to do. So we're going to have to pay for buildings and staff and so forth. And to do that, we want to make sure that those limited financial resources that we do have are being spent in the wisest fashion. So that's why we do that financial analysis. Now, the rest of this module talks a lot about the things that are also covered in the textbook. So I'm just going to highlight some of the ones that are particularly important in public health. Now, payback is a little bit tricky, payback period right there, because it basically looks at how much profit you're making each year and then how many years you need to recoup your initial investment. And while it sounds very money driven, the same concepts can be thought of in a lot of public health programs where patient education, public awareness is one of the key factors. That's where investment 1, 2, 3 years, you have to keep investing incrementally until you reach some goal. That payback period might not be achieving a certain profit level, but that payback period, you might think of that as how long does it take before we raise immunization rates to 80%, for example.